Hi, everybody. This is Katie Rakuta with EcoDistricts, and I want to welcome you to our first EcoDistricts Institute webinar series presentation on civic ecology. We are just going to wait a couple minutes for additional people to join to get started, so I will come back on in just 1 or 2 minutes and we'll get started. Okay, so we are going to get started with this webinar. We have an hour. Again, my name is Katie Rakuta, and I'm a program manager with EcoDistricts. You should all see a slide that says EcoDistricts Institute Webinar Series. We're going to be presenting a slide deck. If you have issues seeing anything and you're on GoToWebinar, please send us a chat and we'll try to help. Everybody is in listen-only mode. If you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to post them in the questions box under your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end where we will field as many questions as we can. So this webinar is the first in a series of 6 as part of our new EcoDistricts Institute, which includes both webinars and in-person foundation courses. And the Institute is designed to help you build knowledge and capacity in your urban and community development work. So I will go over a little bit more about those webinars and foundation courses in a minute. I'm also going to give you a really brief overview of our organization and then turn it over to Tim of SERA Architects to talk about their work on civic ecology. So next slide, please.
Let's see. Huh? Space. It's not doing it. Hang on.
Great. And for Tim and our friends at SERA, if you could go on mute while I'm talking, that would be great. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with EcoDistricts, we are a national nonprofit. We're based in Portland, Oregon, and we have staff in several cities across the country. We work as a national intermediary to help cities, neighborhoods, and developers implement sustainable, equitable, and resilient urban and community development projects. And we primarily do our work in 2 ways. The first is through building a community of practice through our neighborhood certification program, our individual accredited professional credential, and professional development events such as this webinar. And then second, we also support cities and projects through deeper technical assistance and engagement through our accelerator program. I'm not going to talk a lot about any of this today because I want to focus on Tim's presentation, but there will be information for you to reach out and contact me in the follow-up to this webinar if you're interested in learning more about our programs. Next slide. Tim is going to talk a little bit more about this, so I won't go too deep into it, but our work is guided by our framework called the EcoDistricts Protocol. It's free and available to download on our website. In the follow-up email to this webinar, you'll receive a link to the page. In case you're interested in downloading it, I highly encourage it and would love for you to check it out. What I want to stress is that it's a process-oriented framework, and it's really anchored by our 3 imperatives that we think are essential to the work, which are equity, resilience, and climate protection. There are also 6 priority areas to help projects achieve meaningful outcomes in a really holistic way. And then it's all guided by 3 implementation phases. So that's a very brief overview on our protocol. Tim will talk more about it, and then you're able to download it on our website. Before I turn it over to Tim to talk further, I wanted to quickly share upcoming dates and topics for our webinars. Next slide, please. So on the left, you'll see upcoming dates and topics for our webinars. The webinars are free to attend, and we encourage our full extended network to attend each of them. We also send out e-blasts to notify you of who the speaker will be and what the topic will be as the date gets closer. The foundation courses on the right are a little bit deeper dives. They're full-day trainings, and they are to help you prepare to become an accredited professional or use the protocol more deeply in your work. So we'll also be sending out e-blasts about those foundation courses as we begin to plan them. But for those of you in the Denver area, we have one coming up on February 20th in Denver, and would love to see you there. So a really quick introduction. Tim is a principal at SERA Architects based in Portland, Oregon. It's a firm that offers integrated services in architecture, urban design, planning, and sustainability consulting. So his work is really aimed at creating whole and beautiful places that enrich the human experience and also integrate nature at both the aesthetic and then the system levels. Their work spans a variety of scales, from the neighborhood, which is where EcoDistricts primarily focuses, to the campus and city and region on a larger scale. And Tim developed the Civic Ecology framework, so I'm excited to turn it over to him now to tell us more about it.
Thank you, Katie. And hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be presenting over the EcoDistricts radio network. We're talking to you from the 3rd floor of SERA Architects in beautiful downtown and surprisingly sunny Portland, Oregon today. So it's terrific to be with you all. What I want to talk to you about today is the Civic Ecology framework that we've developed. And quite consistent with EcoDistrict, this is really something that's intended to address issues like climate change, equity, and resilience, but to do so through a really strong democracy framework. We're really all about co-design in this framework. So 3 really key features of the Civic Ecology framework are that it is systems-based, it's really about co-design, and again, this whole notion of strong democracy. It's really important. So a little bit of framing here. Why do we care about this? Well, this is really all about cities and urban places. And as you know, in the United States, around 2030, we're going to be heading toward 90% urban. Worldwide, 60%. So working in urban places is a really important thing. We're also quite concerned with the ecological footprint of our lifestyle all across the globe, and everything from energy, carbon, land use, forest use, fisheries, everything has an impact on the climate. And it also has an impact on the planet. And so here's a little interesting tidbit that when you begin to project out our current ecological footprint out into 2050, you realize that we need more than 5 Earths. We ain't got them. So a lot of folks out there are talking about the impact of increased reliance on technology, and those folks have calculated anywhere from a 1 to 2% efficiency, which surprisingly gets us down to 3 Earths. Well, we don't have 3 Earths either, so we really need to be thinking about solutions to that. And in the design profession, where my firm exists, as well as EcoDistricts, we've begun to take this on with climate challenges and such. The idea of being innovative in the green building sphere, really important through living building, through LEED, through all of those things, all very important. And also important equally is to begin to think about our public infrastructure at the district scale, how we handle water, how we handle habitat waste, transportation, all those things, really important. And again, if you look in support of all that, if you begin to look at where many of the systems, these sort of technological systems, begin to optimize, what you'll find on this graph here is that right around the campus scale of about 10,000 people is where a lot of these systems become come together and become the most efficient. 10,000 people is about the size of a typical urban neighborhood. We call it a campus here, but a small town, an urban neighborhood, it turns out is probably the place, I would say, from an efficiency point of view that we really want to focus. And it happens to be the place where we're focusing as well as our eco-districts. And again, you know, eco-districts, the power of the neighborhood scale, we are in full partnership with eco-districts on this notion of attacking sustainability, not at the individual building scale and not just at the infrastructure scale, but at the neighborhood scale, where we're small enough to innovate, big enough to have an impact, and really focus on the people as being our primary resource in terms of achieving resilience and sustainability. And as Katie mentioned, Eco-Districts has been brilliant at developing some of these tools, the protocol, the certification, and we're in full support, and many of these programs can be used jointly with our Civic Ecology framework, and we really are looking forward to those opportunities in the future. So for our own part here at SERA Architects, I'm a co-author of a book that you can download for free from our website. It's called Making Eco-Districts. And this was the sort of definitive case about making eco-districts from the strong democracy point of view. And so a lot of the ideas that you'll hear me talk about today, you can read about in greater depth in Making Eco-Districts. So, you know, if you begin to think about one of the places that inspired all of us, I know it inspired the eco-districts movement as well as us here at SERA, it was one of the first sort of eco-communities in Europe. And we noted that fundamentally it began with a concern about systems thinking. Everything having to do with waste, having to do with energy, having to do with water was sort of thought about in an integrated systems fashion before any of the architecture was actually designed or built. So this kind of systems thinking is fundamentally a different way of thinking about community design, whether it's a new community or an existing community. And the outcome of that are some really, you know, innovative, what we like to call hardware projects, such as this in that community. But what we all came to realize, eco-districts and we at SERA here, is this idea that really the solution has to do with people, with behavior change and community action, and beginning to rely on our civic entrepreneurs as our greatest resource. And so the civic ecology framework is really a people framework. And so, you know, here we have a couple of circles having to do with physical development and physical context. This is the place where the design professions tend to live, and we like to call it the hardware axis, where you go out and build green buildings, you do green infrastructure, all really important to addressing many of these issues. But we also believe that there's another axis having to do with the culture of place and the underlying resource flows that help animate places. The energy, water, waste, food, money, cultural systems are all equally important, if not more so, and we like to call that the software axis. And so together, software and hardware really enable us to do some deep placemaking. So place is really having to do with both software and hardware. So that leads us to our definition of civic ecology, and it's really this integrated web of all of these things that you could imagine flow through your community that maybe you don't pay a lot of attention to, but if they weren't there, you would really not have a very good lifestyle in your community. Energy, nutrients, resources of all kinds, finance, information, culture, and these are envisioned by the community, created by the community, and managed by citizens who are all acting for the common good. So this is kind of the fundamental definition of civic ecology. And we have used this in rural context, in urban context, and I'll show you an example from each of those. And again, it's a sustainable framework, and it's also a highly democratic framework. And so, you know, the idea of making sustainable, resilient communities has to do not just with the physical capital, the hardware, but also the underlying resource flow systems, what we call the civic ecology of a place. And so why do we call it civic? Well, the management of place depends on people being engaged and performing civic duties beyond just paying taxes and voting. I mean, those two things will keep you out of jail and, you know, sort of enable you to complain about your local government or even national government, but they're really not enough to sort of bring about the change that we all know we need in many of our communities. The ecology part is beginning to think about an integrated way of considering economics as nested within the local social capital, which in turn both are nested within the carrying capacity of our local ecosystems. So this is really fundamentally a human ecosystem approach that is focusing on the democracy of the human realm. Finally, it's a learning ecology. What we have found over time is that the systems you create 1 year, in 5 years may be out of date or may need to be revised or improved because the world changes so fast, whether it's technology, whether it's climate change. We need to be prepared. We need to have our hands on the steering wheel of our systems and our community to be able to adapt to a lot of these changes. So we call it a learning ecology because it really is quite an adaptive framework for community design. So really, civic ecology is really about putting together the pieces that make great communities anywhere in the world, and we've defined it as a process for creating vibrant communities. And the fundamental challenge here, when you think about trying to address climate change and trying to address resilience and equity issues through a democratic means, it's really all about dealing with the kind of NIMBY challenge. And so our approach has been to kind of daylight the design process. So, you know, here we have some sketches. These tend to be the kind of sketches that get done behind closed doors by experts like us, but they really need to become open assets, because what happens if they're not is that you end up with community folks who come to public events disempowered and feeling like they're being talked at and not having a stake in what's being discussed because they really didn't have a way to be part of the co-design process. So that's something we want to avoid, and in doing so, empower people so that we don't end up with environments like this that just seem to be not owned by anyone and just seem to have devolved or evolved into what they are now, which is not really positive contributions to anyone's community. So if you think about this the way we have, there are really 3 fundamental participants in community building. It's the kind of civic realm, the community itself, whether it's citizens groups, local nonprofits, local religious organizations, and then there's the development community, the people who actually can make change by virtue of their expertise in bringing funding to actually build projects, and then there's the local government. All of these entities have really important parts to play, yet so often what happens is that the community feels threatened and puts a wall up around itself and becomes the place where good ideas maybe come to die, where NIMBYism is sort of fueled, and it becomes the place where no is the typical answer. So I love this cartoon about NIMBY being unfair and inaccurate because people are opposed to not just development in their backyard, but sides and fronts as well. So we're trying to figure out how we can attack that problem, and our vision in doing so is about community empowerment. So we want to make sure that folks who live in the community have a voice in the design process. We also want to make sure that they have a voice in making actual places for people themselves in their community. We have found that the genius of a place oftentimes comes from the people that live there. They know so much about their community, and they may just lack the means, the technical means for designing public places. The idea of making connected neighborhoods, and connected not just through information, but also through vibrant transportation systems that actually take people where they need to go. And the fact that it really draws on the social capital of a community that interconnects everyone as part of the design process. And then finally, making sure that the environments we create are in harmony with nature, whether it's through food production, whether it's through habitat, whether it's just through landscape and biophilia. These are all important aspects to bring to this notion of co-design. So we go back to our little diagram here of the community and the wall around itself. And basically what we're trying to do here is to break down the wall and to bring all of these folks into a partnership, a civic public-private partnership, where all of the interests become a tapestry of solutions within the community. And it seems to be the way to move forward, where the community's vision can actually be implemented through policy enacted by the government and actual projects that are developed by developers, by designers, so that we're all partnerships in this venture. So, you know, our solution through the Civic Ecology Framework is to really involve people, as I mentioned. And, you know, here's an example of some folks sitting around a map of their neighborhood here in Portland. And the idea that we have brought to this framework is something called flow mapping, community resource flow mapping. And it's the idea of having citizens actually design these underlying resource flows. And I'm going to show you right now kind of an example of this. So this, so what you heard there were the sights and sounds of democracy in action. And what these folks are doing is doing a resource flow mapping exercise for a neighborhood here in Portland. And we'll talk more about that later on, but it's really become a powerful tool in our toolbox in the civic ecology realm. The outcome, we have found the outcome in civic ecology, there tends to be 4 categories. The first is informed development. So when people are part of the process, what comes out is something that has broad community support and is informed by the needs and the preferences of the local community, whether it be, you know, land use plans or detailed development plans like this. It's also new policy. So we have worked in a number of communities and introduced the civic ecology framework thinking into policy discussions and built them into community sustainability plans, into comprehensive plans and such. And so, you know, here's a resource flow map for a county here in Oregon. And if you could imagine a map like this having equal force to a zoning code, to a comprehensive plan, to a precise plan, when development occurs, not only does it have to adhere to zoning and building regulations, but it also has to situate itself within a resource flow map like this and demonstrate how it will contribute to this kind of regional resilience framework. So a really important part of civic ecology is trying to inform the policy framework. The third outcome are trained leaders. You know, we recognize that we can't touch 1 million communities, but we can touch 1 million people. And what we do a lot of is train people like these folks in the Atlanta, Georgia region on how to use civic ecology and how to become leaders in their community for resilience by using this tool. And as part of that training, we encourage folks in training sessions as well as in the communities that we actually do contract work to form a civic public-private partnership, some kind of entity that can actually own this process, the outcomes and the building of projects over time, the fundraising, all the things that go into it. So a really important aspect of all this is the civic public-private partnership. And the final outcome tends to be projects and programs, whether it's a farmer's market like this one in Damascus, Oregon, that happened within 9 months of our civic ecology work. They went out, raised money, and came and built a weekly farmer's market that happens year-round. So really important that the projects and the programs happen. And then also the idea that you know, you can bring certain products to problems that communities everywhere have around the unhoused population. And here are some examples of some of the modules, homeless modules that have been developed here in Portland, some of which have been done by our office. But providing a framework, a civic ecology framework that tells you where these kinds of things need to happen in the most optimal way. So what all of these projects and these thoughts have in common is this idea of co-design, that design doesn't belong to design professionals. It really belongs to all of us who have a stake in the future of our communities. So quickly, we have 5 steps here that I'll just walk you through quite quickly whenever we do these civic ecology processes. The first is to work with the local civic public-private partnership entity to define the area, map its assets, identify stakeholders, determine interest within the community to be considered. The investigation phase, where we're really looking at existing plans, mapping opportunities, addressing historic issues, things like equity, things like displacement, a variety of issues that often don't get talked about, and just setting the table straight and really having a face-to-face, honest and open discussion about some of these issues. Really important to setting the stage for positive change in the future. And then identifying the community's shared core values. What is it we all believe in together that will help us move the needle in the future? The third phase is this whole visioning, identifying a shared vision. What is your vision of this place in the future? Using flow mapping, the tool that we just showed you, to figure out how to implement that shared vision, how to systematize it, what kind of development programs come out of that, what kind of projects, and identify physical development and the kind of underlying design principles, planning principles, and concepts. Really important part of the vision program. The next step, the implementation, where we're talking about a role for local government around creating policies, creating business plan for projects, bringing in the development community, funding and doing projects, really important. And then finally, something that's often overlooked, but how do you know if your community is on the right path to success? So charting progress, identifying success indicators, and creating a plan for periodically reporting progress and making sure that you correct things that aren't working and keep moving forward in terms of a positive future. So as you can see, civic ecology is about opportunity, it's about democracy, and it's really about this notion of creating a resilient future for our communities. So what I'd like to do, I have a couple of projects here I'd like to just talk about, and then a few other items, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So this is a project that actually was born from the Eco District Incubator that was held here in Portland a number of years ago with a group representing the Perrien Park neighborhood in Detroit, Michigan. And it was a really fascinating project, and it's on a little bit of a hiatus right now, but we're hopeful that it's going to continue at some point in the future. And so those of you who are familiar with Detroit know that within its 139 square miles are a lot of areas of extremely high vacancy depicted here in this map, and even moderate vacancy. So as you can see, a good part of Detroit, by the way, my hometown, is quite distressed. And so this happens to be the Perrien Park neighborhood. It also happens to be the neighborhood where I was born many years ago in Detroit, Michigan, and it used to be one of the densest neighborhoods in the Midwest. It had streetcars, it had rail service. It's really an amazing place, and it now sort of looks like rural America. And so we were asked to come in and help the neighborhood and potential investors create a neighborhood regeneration model for all of Detroit, but using Perrien Park as kind of the first model out of the gate. And the idea about this was that we wanted to figure out a way to embed the means of production and wealth creation within the community and move Detroit beyond and away from the sort of past of a monoculture, monoeconomy that was really focused on sort of the automobile industry into something that's much more variegated, much more sustainable, people-centric, polycultural, and a polyeconomic view of the future. And so the first thing we did was we asked people, okay, given where you are today and where you've been, close your eyes. What is this place like in various parts of the future? What is it going to be like for your children to be in a community like this in the future after we have done our work here? And we heard some really amazing and inspiring stories about unification, about a people's economy, co-ops, shared public spaces, parks, orchards, just really inspiring and heartfelt ideas that could be implemented within the community. And then we also asked people, you know, what is it that you value as a group of people wanting to move forward as a community? And as you could imagine, high on the list was equity, equitable access to things like transportation, food, governance, arts is important, a local economy and culture, educational opportunities, and the usual things around safety, clean water, you know, safe land, natural systems, spirituality. A variety of things came out through these community conversations. And then we began to ask, so how does this translate into programming the future? What kind of elements do you think are going to be important for your community in the future to achieve this vision consistent with your values? And we heard a variety of things that you can see here. And then we began to translate those into what we love to call our civic ecology dots. So a variety of things you can see up here: tool libraries, restaurants, landscaping businesses, retail, transportation access, vehicle charging stations, bike sharing, local job opportunities, local health care, a whole variety of things that begin to become the game pieces for the civic ecology flow mapping exercise that then residents undertook over maps of their community, as you can see here. And then what came out of that were a variety of maps. We had, I think, 5 different teams that were working on this. This is just a small selection of some of the brilliant relationship mapping that the folks in this community did, having to do with arts and performance, community center, shared resources, daylighting watersheds, creating health and wellness entities within the community, growing their own food around permaculture plots, and creating a revised Main Street with locally run businesses and entrepreneurial clusters so that there's new businesses being grown down here in partnership with existing businesses within the Detroit area and even some of the academic institutions. So how do we begin to mentor a new economy within this community? And how does that resolve itself in terms of what the opportunities are for you know, a variety of things around transit, around new job creation, et cetera. And then how do you begin to think about a community and back out some of the systems that people began to describe, like a comprehensive food system that ties Detroit's central market, its local farms, locally owned restaurants, creating new businesses around restaurants, urban agriculture, and a whole variety of things, food innovation centers, local grocery stores, all of it constituting a kind of local and healthy food system that actually came out of the civic ecology mapping. And so we began to map some of those elements, create this kind of land use diagram within the community, and began to introduce some examples of, you know, permaculture, as you can see the image in the upper right, and indoor farming that's beginning to happen in many abandoned buildings in the Detroit area. These folks growing, you know, high quality produce for sale to local restaurants and such. So you can also see beginning to populate it with more of these ideas. Our client ran a digital fabrication shop, and they were actually 3D printing buildings like the one in the upper right-hand corner you can see there. Is it possible to actually introduce that technology to actually build some of the buildings that come out of this process sometime in the future? Likewise, there was a lot of fear of what happens if we become so successful that we actually get displaced through gentrification, and so we brought a housing land trust expert into the discussions to help the group begin to design and think through a community land trust model and how that could actually not only say guarantee, but afford intergenerational housing affordability as opposed to just affordability for the first people who buy, who then look to sell at a profit, thereby turning the community into a less of an affordable place. So, you know, these kinds of systemic relationships, these policy outcomes are really important outcome of these discussions. So that was Detroit. We're hoping that that one picks the pace up again pretty soon. I want to show you another example, and this one from a rural town of about 8,000 people in a place called Hailey, Idaho. Very interesting and beautiful place. So you can see that finger going up to the right is a development site that was put on the market, and there was great concern within the community about what the future of that site was going to be, because folks viewed that site as kind of a community asset. They had free and open access to it. They were using it for Nordic skiing. They were using it for jogging, for running, for just walking and hiking. And so suddenly a developer came to town and was going to threaten that asset. And indeed, the developer, actually a local developer who had out-of-state partners, his first proposal was to do something that looked like this, about 450 McMansions, a golf course community. This community was not thrilled about it, and they let the developer know twice. As a matter of fact, he tried to get permitted twice and was just unsuccessful. And so we became involved with the civic ecology process to move it beyond that solution. And so we began to involve a lot of the community members. Many of them showed up. It was really a wonderful turnout in this whole flow mapping exercise. And what came out of it were these really complex maps about how can we use this site and its future development to grow a local economy, to grow jobs, to provide local food production, access to local and healthy food, education opportunities, innovation opportunities. There really were some brilliant ideas that were expressed in this series of sessions that we had with people. And as you can see on this Wordle, a lot of things around recreation, habitat, partnerships, artisan industries, and new Sage schools, a new charter school dedicated to teaching kids about the local ecology and food systems and how you can use the local landscape to grow food and get it into local markets. So some really innovative ideas that came out of that. And out of that came some development alternatives around how to look at the site in the future. And what came out of that is this kind of hybrid integrated land use plan that began to describe things like most of the site being preserved in organic agriculture, on-site waste treatment, courtesy of our friends at Biohabitats, also an eco-district partner. Began to look at creek restoration. We began to look at orchards, organic orchards. All the development was condensed down near the existing development in the existing high school, providing a new park and a new charter school and a new village center and an innovation center shown there in the light purple as an outpost for the University of Idaho and some of their innovation work around agriculture. So the whole thing began to come together as kind of a community-supported future development plan, which then turned into a development plan like this, which is now entitled, and with the support, the broad support of the community, and the developer has actually begun to sell lots. So this is a project that will probably come to fruition over the next 5 years, to everyone's excitement in the community. So I'd also like to talk about sort of something that we haven't quite done yet, but we are on the verge of doing. We began to realize that the civic ecology model and the framework and the playing pieces aren't just useful for resilience and equity, but they could also be used for a variety of of issues, and this one happens to be around the unhoused population that we have here in Portland, Oregon. And I'm sure a lot of you listening are parts of cities or urban areas that have the same problems around the unhoused population. And could we use this technique to help solve this systemic problem that we have in America and probably places outside America around unhoused population? So the idea of community action. So could we take a look at the entire city of Portland, all of its neighborhoods and its districts, and begin to think of a citywide systemic solution around this problem? And so we developed new tools for that around affordable housing, around village gardening, around health support, needle collection, distributions, pop-up camping, tiny homes. There's a variety of issues here that would bring to bear if you started to think about this issue as a systemic problem. And so we are beginning to investigate how to use that. And just to give you an example of how you might do something like that, this is a close-in neighborhood here in Portland. There's an existing unhoused population in tiny homes called Right to Dream over there in the upper left. And we're beginning to think about how you connect some of the important resources in a resource flow system that would help support a self-managed village over there, whether it has to do with operating expenses, growing local food, food carts, the idea of taking care of simple issues like laundry facilities and clothing drop-offs, and how you could make use of local resources within the fabric of the community so that housing folks in the unhoused in a managed village within a neighborhood could actually be seen as a win-win instead of something to be avoided. And so, you know, just the whole idea of getting the components of the system around the table, including homeless people, and trying to figure out how to design a system that works for everyone is a really important piece of the civic ecology framework. And you could imagine coming out with community health and wellness network. I mean, this is an awfully complex diagram, but it tells you what a complex issue this is. And if we can begin to unravel the systemic issues, the systemic problems around the homelessness issue, we may be able to look for the leverage points and create a better future for all these folks. Whether it's, you know, a future that includes gardens and contributing to the food culture and food system of an entire neighborhood, as well as figuring out ways to temporarily house people in shelters, be on the road to getting them into permanent housing and into well-paying jobs. So I want to just conclude with one of the things that we've learned over 10 years of doing civic ecology is that we have begun to evolve a pattern language around some of the same relationship, the same solutions to typical problems that we keep seeing reported over and over again in these sessions that we do. And this is, the first one is, how could you create a main street that is a co-op? So in other words, all the businesses, whether they're restaurants or they're service businesses, could become part of a local cooperative that buys its goods and services locally in bulk and from sustainable, resilient sources, so that you begin to change the market for these goods and services, and at the same time create a very stable and locally, local economic multiplier enhancing main street in the community. So this was a pattern language that we begin to see over and over again. The idea of eliminating the concept of waste and turning waste into energy is something we hear a lot about. Ecological restoration is another one, you know, so how does money flow through a system like that? How do you get people to become part of a local ecological restoration system? Again, eliminating the concept of waste and turning it into a community resource. How do you do that? How do you grow a local economic cluster? There's probably a variety of resource nodes that you need to begin to connect up. One of the strongest ideas is around mentorship between existing businesses and startups. And so, you know, what does a system look like that does that? How do you address the idea of affordable housing and common areas through perhaps a community land trust, something we learned a lot about in our work in Detroit. So, and then finally, community food systems is one. Every single community we've ever worked in, this is the first thing that they're interested in, is access to healthy, safe, and equitable food systems throughout their community. So that's the end of my presentation. I think we have about 15 minutes for Q&A, and we would love to address as many questions as we can. I will note before I stop talking that the presentation will be available, what I understand, through Ecodistricts on the Ecodistrict website, also the SERA Architects website. There are a lot of those diagrams in there that I'm sure you're going to want to look through, and especially those systems diagrams, and just sort of study. So thank you very much, and happy to hear your questions.
Thanks, Tim. So we have gotten a few questions, and everyone is welcome to post more. I'll start to field those. The first question, and there's a couple for me too, but I'll answer those at the end. The first question is, did the Perry Park work come as an outgrowth of Detroit Future City? And then what's the connection to that city plan and the landscape typologies developed in that plan, especially addressing like urban ecological uplift?
That project really came out of the Eco District Incubator. We had two groups who came from Detroit. One, their work did come out of the Detroit Future Plan. The Perry Park group chose not to do that we were quite aware of the Detroit Future Plan, and actually brought some of the landscape typologies into that thinking, but they chose to go in a different direction than the Detroit Future Plan.
Okay, thanks. The next question is, how would you recommend people incorporate civic ecology practices into individual development or architecture projects?
Into an individual development or an architecture project? Well, you know, when you start doing that, the first thing you realize is that resilience and sustainability doesn't end at the property line. And so the way I would recommend doing that is to try to figure out how you can reach out into broader aspects of the community so that you don't treat your project like a closed loop system within its property lines. That is probably not a long-term resilient strategy, because as you could imagine, you might end up proposing some things that will impact negatively your neighbors. And so suddenly you've created this sort of anti-democratic relationship from the get-go. So my sense is that it would be great to try to figure out a way to enter into a dialogue with the entire community about how your project could become a positive building block for maybe an entire vision for the community.
Great. Next question is, are your clients usually local governments? And if so, is there tension between the community and the government, or whoever brings you in to the community to do the work? And then how do you handle something like working with a community that has been through a lot of design processes but may have had a loss of faith in what the processes are, how the processes are designed to help them?
Okay, well, there's a lot of questions in there. You know, we don't really find pushback from groups. You know, our clients have spanned from a private sector developer to local government to community groups. And as you can imagine, the first thing we always do is recommend that whatever sector that group comes from, that we immediately reach out to the other sectors. It's a really important thing. And I'll tell you just from experience that you could come up with the most wonderful solution to a problem, and if you leave somebody out, even if they agree with what you came up with, they're going to come back and have something to say to you, probably negatively about it. People fundamentally want to be part of the sausage making, and to deny them that opportunity is just, you know, running counter to your goals. So I got to remember the second question. There was another part.
The second part was well, who are your usual clients, and then how do you handle like working in a community where there may have been a loss of faith in over planning?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have actually had experience in that. You remember the image of the farmers market that I showed? That was done in a community called Damascus here that had been experiencing 10 years of planning fatigue. And so what we did was we went out and just began to knock on doors and talk to people and describe to them how this was completely different from what they had been looking at. What they had been looking at over the last 10 years had to do with land use planning, transportation, all of those kinds of hardware focused things. And what we were proposing was something that was software focused. It was a process that was going to empower them as local experts in ways that they had never been empowered before, and that we humbly respected and understood their feeling of fatigue. It's quite easy to be fatigued when you keep seeing the same thing happen over and over again, and you're not part of it, and you feel like you have something to add that you just don't feel like you're empowered to add. And so we just said to them, why don't you give it a try? So what we say to all communities who are in fatigue, let's just try this, and if it doesn't work, we'll be happy to leave you alone forever. But we also challenge them that you are the ones who are really going to have to own this. This civic public-private partnership is the key. If you don't have that in place from the very beginning, you're probably not ready to go through a process like this. And so we have tried to work in communities that have not had that entity set up, and it has not gone well. And so we have declared that we are not going to do that again. So I hope that answers the question.
Great. We have a lot of questions coming in, so we're not going to be able to answer all of them, but a few more. Do you work in communities that don't currently exist, like if they're going to be master planned communities? And if so, how do you go about doing that?
The answer is yes. Believe it or not, we use this process in Abu Dhabi, of all places. So maybe that, I don't know whether that question came from somebody in the United States or not, but we have actually used it to develop new communities. And what we did was we involved the surrounding farmers in this process of creating a new economy that could be the basis for a new capital city for the western region of Abu Dhabi. So this area was going to go from 5,000 people to 65,000 people. And by involving local farmers and others, we helped figure out a way to create the basis for a water system that would actually replenish their fossil aquifer over a series of generations, how to deal with local energy, how to deal with local food, etc. Some of the most profound insights that we had into the local culture that we needed to design for were from the people who were actually part of the culture. So we have done that. I would say the work in Hailey, Idaho, that's kind of going to be a new neighborhood, even though it's attached to an existing town. So that in many ways would function as a new community as well.
Great, and that question was from someone in Melbourne, Australia, actually.
Oh, great, perfect.
Next question is, so you talked a little bit about eco-districts, but do you ever incorporate facets of, for example, the Living Community Challenge or sustainable sites into your planning processes with civic ecology?
We, I would say not formally. We have taken many of the ideas from there and introduced them to the community as part of a kind of upfront, best practices. Here's some great ideas we want you to think about. So that, that's a good question for another reason. I don't want you to get the idea that what we do is we show up and we turn people loose with their greatest and craziest ideas, because what happens when you do that is you get really crazy ideas. So what we try to do is provide some context for some of the issues that are happening in the world that are going to impact them, like climate change, like the new economy, like the information economy, and all those things. And we try to say to them, you have issues in your community, they are going to be impacted by these larger issues, and we want to show you some ways of dealing with that. And a lot of those things do come out of sites. They come out of biophilia. We have incorporated quite a bit of biophilia in a lot of our work, and we are looking to work with eco districts a lot more closely on some of these projects, because I think your protocol and some of our work would dovetail quite nicely.
I agree. Next question is, how do you get people in neighborhoods with low civic engagement to participate in a systems thinking process like civic ecology?
Yeah, that's a great question. And whenever I give this talk, usually in communities like that, they ask me that. And we do a variety of things. First of all, we want to make sure you go, every community has leaders, and a lot of them are just kind of the unofficial leaders, the opinion makers in the community. So we want to make sure that we start there, because we know that they have networks and they can influence opinion throughout the community, and they can actually bring more people to the table oftentimes than the local government can. So that's one thing. We try to involve children. We try to involve them by going to the schools, because we know that children bring their parents to these issues. And by the way, I will say that some of the most innovative and beautiful solutions that have come out of this process have come from children, middle school kids, high school kids, who have dreamed up everything from a local food system, that they grow the food in their school garden, and they have a school composter, and they tie in with local food carts and that kind of stuff. It's just absolutely brilliant stuff. And their parents who, so let me just say that children are systems thinkers, because they haven't been siloed through their education, where a lot of us, I include myself, begin to think, housing is a housing problem, but it's actually an energy problem, it's a cultural problem, etc. Kids do that brilliantly. So we make sure that we have a pipeline to the youth who participate in this. We also make sure we provide food, we provide daycare, we provide translation services if needed. So we try to make it as comfortable, open, and inviting as possible for people to come, so that maybe it could become a night out on the town with their partner. I don't know. But we also, we know that people are busy, that they, a lot of these things have to happen on weekends. Sometimes we do them in the evenings. We'll repeat them if we don't feel like we've gotten a big enough crowd. We'll do a do-over. We have done that in Detroit, in that community. So there's a variety of things, a variety of strategies that we use to just get people to become part of this, short of announcing a future calamity like come out and talk about the nuclear facility we're going to locate in your neighborhood, which is guaranteed to get every single person in the community to come out. We don't do that. I wouldn't recommend that, but whatever it takes to get folks to come out is on the table.
Thanks, Tim. So we had a lot of more questions, but we're almost at time, and I want to respect everybody's time. Just a couple of things that people have asked regarding eco districts I think are important to announce to the group. One is, if you are an eco districts accredited professional, our CEU is available, and the answer is, if you would like to, so eco districts APs have to report a certain number of hours every 2 years to keep up their credential. If you would like to use the webinars to self-report those hours to maintain your credential, you are welcome to do that, and you can do that through our website. We can also create certificates if you want to self-report these webinars for other hours, such as, APA or AIA. So you can reach out to me. I'll send my contact information. And then the second question is, how are we linked to the American Planning Association or the American Society of Landscape Architects, and specifically the Institute? And the short answer is, we don't have any formal affiliation with professional associations, but we do like to work with associations, especially in local areas where we're hosting a foundation course, or to drum up attendance and help co-promote events. So if you're interested in talking more about how we can engage further, feel free again to contact me. So that pretty much wraps things up. I just want to thank Tim again for walking us through this really awesome work. We think it's really well aligned with the Eco Districts protocol and can be integrated into the formation and governance process that we stress in our protocol. So I encourage everyone to learn more about both the protocol and the civic ecology framework and to see how you can incorporate them into your work. And we'll send a follow-up email that includes links to download the protocol, the Civic Ecology website, the recording for this webinar and the slides, and then contact information for both Tim and myself. And thanks everybody for joining, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.